Hello and welcome back. I'm your host, Professor Pete, and this is part 3, the final segment of a narrated slideshow summary of my Memorial Collaborations exhibit held at Kellogg Community College in the fall of 2023. In addition to making collages and mixed media works for the past 40 years, I was a full-time art professor at Kellogg Community College from 1992 through 2021. As explained in more detail in part 1 of this video series, my concept for a Memorial Collaborations exhibit was to present a series of artworks that I created using artifacts and collage materials originally belonging to a deceased family member or friend. For my artworks, I symbolically collaborated with the following 9 amazing individuals that I was honored to have known. For this part 3 video, the focus will be on the following 3 friends, and then there will be some final overview comments. My friend Philip Carey was a California artist based in Morro Bay. As a young man, he was briefly a member of the Grammy-winning vocal ensemble, the Greg Smith Singers, but the bulk of his career was spent as a graphic artist and exhibit designer. In retirement, he turned his full attention to making quirky, fine art. He became well known for creating postal envelope art or mail art, artworks produced to be stamped and sent through the U.S. Postal Service. Shown here are 3 examples. When I first met Philip around 2014, it was in Marshall, Michigan, where he was exhibiting some of his work at the Postal Museum there. We struck up an immediate friendship, and I invited him to return to Michigan in 2016 to mount an exhibition at Kellogg Community College. This show featured several large-scale collage installations and was titled Trashing My Art, Arting My Trash. The work shown on the left humorously chronicled some of his serious health struggles leading up to an eventual kidney transplant, while the piece on the right used hundreds of candy wrappers to chronicle the history of chocolate. The style of Philip's large-scale works looked to me as if the cartoonist R. Crumb, example on the left, got mashed up with Frank Stella's 1980s and 90s wall sculptures like the one seen on the right. Here are 2 of my Memorial Collaboration works titled Peepholes to Infinity, dedicated to Philip. I started with several of his mailers that my wife and I received from him that featured his custom-made Morro Bay address sticker. For several years, Philip sent something in the mail nearly every week or 2 to either me or my wife Jan, or both of us. Often his enclosed letters would include random photos or ephemera that he noted he knew we really needed. In this example, 2 of the received mailers from Philip were combined by me and enhanced with decorative tape and other materials to create a symbolic collaboration. For each of my collages, I cut out the oval recipient spot on the mailers to form a peephole for gallery viewers to interact with. The 5 framed works I created in Philip's honor were double-sided and hung floating in the gallery. Since Philip had exhibited in this same space just a few years prior, it was as if the viewer could peer through the peepholes directed by Philip's mischievous presence and get glimpses of the rest of the show. On the left is a shot of me looking through one of the floating collages, and on the right is a hint of a work dedicated to Mike Ballard as seen through one of the collage's peepholes. Next is a tribute to Gayland Spaulding, who was born in rural Illinois. In college, he studied piano performance before shifting to theater. His involvement in theater over the years ranged from acting to costuming to eventually directing. During his 70-plus years, he lived in New York City, Dallas, and Chicago before he and David King, his partner of 35 years, retired to Marshall, Michigan in the early 2000s. Shown here on the left is my 2009 collage, The Economic Crisis Comfort Food Quilt. Stylistically, I was influenced by Romare Bearden's work, like the one shown on the right, which often used quilt references in the compositions. After David King's passing, Gayland moved to Battle Creek, Michigan, and remodeled a mid-century modern home there. He liked my comfort food quilt collage, and it ended up hanging in his entryway for several years. After his passing, Gayland's sister and his close friend Patrice were preparing for his estate sale, and they asked me if I wanted my piece back. I agreed, but I knew that I would always associate this work with my departed friend. Gayland had taken my pottery classes at KCC and made some awesome projects, but often he didn't like the finished results. And rather than let him smash them, I convinced him to give me several of his cast-off projects to use as garden sculptures. So for my Memorial Collaborations exhibit, I ended up mounting one of his rejected raku-fired vases onto the top of my earlier collage. Among other details, I added an old paint lid crusted with dried paint on top that became a visual equivalent to raku crackle glaze, and a flashy fabric swatch from one of Gayland's costuming notebooks. This piece, also dedicated to Gayland, is titled Memento Mori, and it is composed of a background collage made from leftover cards from Gayland's 2022 memorial service. The cards featured a photo that Gayland had taken of a seed pod. Over the top are small ceramic tiles Gayland had made for a mosaic project left unfinished at the time of his passing. Next up is Paul Edwards. He was a rough-and-tumble guy from a small community of Burr Oak in southern Michigan. Rarely seen without his hat and boots on, he was an authentic cowboy and was trained as a farrier and had been involved in some rodeos in the American Southwest. Later in life, after some extreme low points, he decided to turn over a new leaf and started taking classes at KCC. He enrolled in KCC's photography program, and as a photographer, Paul's biggest influence was the work of Edward Curtis, who was known for documenting Native Americans and frontier culture of the late 1800s, early 1900s. Two of Curtis's works are seen here. KCC photo professor Ryan Flathaw taught Paul how to create cyanotypes and Van Dyke brown prints, allowing Paul to mimic an antique look to his images. Paul took several of my art courses as well and quickly learned that I was a collage artist, so he would give me his darkroom mistakes, knowing I might use them in my own work. A detail of one of my collages using Paul's mistake cyanotypes is shown here. Shown here is the work of famous post-pop conceptualist John Baldessari. He was known for manipulating appropriated photos and creating juxtapositions open to new meanings. For my Memorial Collaborations exhibit, I thought it would be fun if a traditionalist like Cowboy Paul met up with somebody contemporary like Baldessari in heaven to create a whole new hybrid of work. Here is one of my Baldessari-inspired tributes to Cowboy Paul called Watching the River Flow, titled after a Bob Dylan song. I've taken pieces from Paul's cast-off prints and layered and projected them off of the picture plane's surface. Paul himself can be seen on the left side of the arrangement, leaning up against a tree from a self-portrait that he had attempted. Here are two more of my symbolic collaborations with Paul. The collage on the left is Maiden Voyage, and the one on the right is Cowboy's Dream. Paul and I had a mutual love of vinyl record albums, so Cowboy's Dream features a tiny reproduction of a Sons of the Pioneers album cover that mentions the song Cowboy's Dream as a highlight. The multi-layered work on the left is named after an Elvis Costello song, Hurry Down Doomsday, the Bugs Are Taking Over. And the collage on the right is Blues for Paul. Paul was probably oblivious to the connection, but I loved how his random brush marks that he made when he applied his photo emulsion onto various papers resulted in an indirect nod to the abstract expressionist painters. A final piece to discuss from my memorial collaboration show is this work, American Landscape. I consider this to be a capstone piece for my exhibit in that it includes elements and references to several of my symbolic collaborators. Included in American Landscape are some pieces cut from previous wall installations from the early 2000s using jigsaw puzzles. Here's a much younger Professor Pete in the upper left photo. These earlier installations involved many friends and family donating finished puzzles to me. Also included in American Landscape are pieces from another collage installation, this one from 2009, that also included collaborations with other family members. The backing collage for American Landscape was originally made in 2016 as a part of a tongue-in-cheek retrospective series. For the new Memorial Collaborations exhibit, I continued to layer on top of the work that is shown here. The work on the left is by Robert Rauschenberg, and the one on the right is by Jasper Johns. These two famous artists who bridged the gap between abstract expressionists of the 1940s and 50s and the pop artists of the 60s and 70s have been a huge influence on my own work. My piece, American Landscape, includes the previous mentioned layers, but now also includes items from Gayland Spaulding, Paul Edwards, Ken McCosh, Tim Sikora, and others. The end of the child's garden rake dangling in the upper right is a reference to one of my own previous works, History Rake. There are lots of personal and broader symbolic allusions weaving in and out of this piece. If nothing else, it hints that the American Landscape has been created by multiple groups and individuals, forming a complex and diverse whole. Well, I hope you've enjoyed reviewing my Memorial Collaborations exhibit. Creating these tributes was fun, but it also allowed me to reflect positively on some of the many friends and family members I now miss. My appreciation goes out to the many people and groups along the way who helped make this exhibit possible. Well, as I hinted, this is the end of part 3, but if you missed parts 1 and 2, you can always go back and check those out as well. Thanks for watching and listening. This is Professor Pete saying take care, and I hope that our creative paths will cross again.